Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha. This morning I'm going to do a bit of recap on the teachings and ponderings of the last couple of 3 days. I suppose especially focusing on activity and stillness flowing together, the identity or unity of that truth. And the moving inwards and outwards, both in, our Zoom sessions have been very much that way. I see from being here on Zoom with everybody, and then, like you, taking a break and going out into the monastery, which is rather like a small village, where I'll be interacting with people, which is definitely about being more out than in, but while definitely knowing that to do my best to keep what we call still inside, reflective as well as active. Sandokai. Sandokai. San and Kai, and the Kai can be translated as identity, the identity of the coming together of the harmony of relative and absolute, and the whole Sandokai is pointing to that and going ever more deeply. And towards the end was the phrase that I picked out in particular for this retreat was, if from your experience of the senses, basic truth you do not know. And that was pointing right back to stillness within activity, actually, and how lost one can become if one becomes lost in either stillness or activity, and as they are identical, just getting lost in I'm just trying to think what one gets lost in, actually. Ideas and holding to views, perhaps, about oneself and others and existence and all the other aspects one can get lost in is grief and sadness and loss. So much part of our common lives at the moment, and perhaps always. In the first session, I talked about aspects of physical aspects of meditation and how clearly our arms and legs, our movers and shakers, are decommissioned for this activity. And so Dogen talks about really the physical map of our body, and to bring attention into our physicality in the way of giving coordinates. As he says, our ears in line with the navel, nose, and ears in line with the shoulders, nose in line with the navel. And I suggest that the ears are in line with each other, are going away from each other. The shoulders, the top of the arms are going away from each other, and the nose going away from the navel. And as somebody brilliantly told me when I explained this, she said, oh, it's like magnets, the poles of a magnet are reversed. So the nose is being, thinking of the magnet, the nose is going away from the navel, and the shoulders are going away from each other, as in how poles reversed push away from each other. Try it as an image. I've always found it very good. And these actually can operate in your daily life, including what I said about eyes, when out and about, to be taking in what is coming into them, and often eyes are lowered when walking. As in the monastery, we're asked to lower the eyes, but in daily life, in the street, on the road, in your kitchen, looking ahead of yourself would be an obvious direction. I found myself making references to physical location outside of physicality, outside of ourselves. I'd like to say I use ourselves in that broader way of one's whole being. And I've talked about what the weather's like here at Throstle. What I'm looking at out of the window, still snow on the hills, a little bit of sprinkling. And also when we're talking informally, I will ask, well, where are you? Somebody said, well, I'm in my living room. I went, that's good. In living room, in da-da, and gradually expanding out. We live in a larger space, both in the world, and we are actually living in a bigger space within our skins than we actually have an idea of. We are bigger people physically than we think we are. And it's good to keep that in mind, as so many of us think of ourselves as diminutive, and all the other ways of thinking of oneself as being smaller. No, we're actually bigger than we think we are. Talked about the senses. We've focused quite a lot on sound, of hearing. Gave that direction when we were doing the reading, to allow one's ears to hear what is being said, and not preparing your mental thoughts about what is being said, so that you really do absorb what is being said. And likewise, these talks are in meditation for that very reason, that you can empty yourself and just allow the sound of my voice to come into you. I guarantee that you'll forget everything I've said pretty much, and that's just fine. It isn't for remembering. It's hopefully that which resonates with you resonates, and that's, maybe you find it helpful. That's the best I can feel at the moment that my speaking would be for you. The sounding of the gong last night, which I felt was exquisite, brought something for me a meaning actually for me that it hadn't occurred to me before, and that it was almost the sound of our year. As constantly we hear, we know of the vibrant life of somebody, the first sounding of the gong, and then as the sound fades, so many of our friends and acquaintances have faded, whether it's actual physical death or mental incapacity. And there is a subtle beauty in recognizing this fading away, and that is nothing wrong with that. It's connected to the first sound, our experience of people as being lively and active and loved as they are, and then our memory stays there, but we have to remember that there is the fading and the going out of the sound, so we no longer hear them, but we still have the memory of the whole gong, the whole sound of their lives. And that's to be celebrated. And I have some more to say later about how we might use the sound of the gong to remember all those who have died of COVID, and all those who are living with it, and all those who will die from it, and to celebrate their lives, whilst grief and loss are part of the picture too. I've talked about what I've called the veil, the seeing of the surface of things. I think this is probably what got most of us to meditation in the first place, that intuitive sense there's got to be more than just this surface appearances, which look very sharp and real. I actually this morning was thinking how it's rather like when the veil parts and you see, so to speak, and your eyes are open to something to a deeper perspective on conditions and people, just as I'm encouraging us to have a deeper, a more religious perspective on our collective experience of the last 9 months. The metaphor doesn't exactly work, but I thought I'd use it in that others, a couple of people I know actually who've had cataract surgery, and one in particular, when their cataracts were removed and everything settled down, they were like a born again. I can see colour. The world is not grey. My paintwork is not needing to be repainted. It's not sort of a grey muddy colour. It's actually white. So another and more religious term for the veil is the scales falling from one's life, one's eyes. I think the scales fell from my eyes about 3 years after my father died, and I walked out. I was in Cornwall, and I went, what's happened? All the colours are so much more brilliant. The sounds, all my senses had been dampened down through the grief of my father dying, and that I think is quite common, that it takes time for particularly a parent, a close relative, because you have karmic connections, and that takes quite a while for that dampening down to be more, I suppose I viewed it positively as being drawn to be more reflective and inward. That's how I took it. A dampening down of the senses, which can feel like good old depression. I say good old depression because I'd like somebody to put their hand, I don't ask you to do that now, who hasn't felt low mood. And I'm not talking about clinical depression, which is a whole different matter, which is an area of suffering, which I feel great sympathy for, actually. And anybody who's long-term disabled in the energy department, just long-term not functioning as one was designed to. But that too is part of the fading, I think. And there's still the loud sounding of the gong, even if you can't hear it, other people can. So I hope the scales after the retreat, and it often happens after having done a retreat, that the scales tend to fall from your eyes and you appreciate what comes into them in a way that you could not have imagined. I stressed the importance and significance, the teaching of why one sits with dimmed light, quite dimmed light, when meditating. I think there's an invocation we have which says, sitting within the darkened hall. And the darkened hall is a way of talking about sitting in undifferentiated darkness, which is positive. Sitting where the sense of oneself as an individual self gives way to something that is wider, broader, in sitting within the aspect of reality which is absolute. And the physical dimming of the lights around you helps signal that you are moving within. And as I've said, the Zooming meetings have definitely shown up the contrast of, in quotes, being on retreat and moving more within, and then switching off all the equipment here in the common room and going out into the community to get my food and to catch up with people and answer questions and get prepared for the ceremony tonight. So it's been a time of moving within and moving without. And in daily life, of course, as in meditation, actually, we're the moving in and the moving out is one movement. It's not two. It's just not two. Although the spotlight can definitely be more feeling like you're moving within, and the spotlight can move out. So yes, obviously, but one does not exclude the other. I've mentioned flowing. I mentioned flowing in terms of one's ongoing life and decision making. And that when it seems life is a struggle, it doesn't mean to say there's a mistake and you're not doing your best to do your daily life as a conscious trainee, and that if things do seem to be moving right along, you might say, doesn't necessarily mean that that is actually a good thing, but it could be, but it doesn't mark you off as doing, in quotes, good training. It just seems that sometimes when you're able to follow the inner compass, little promptings, that life does seem to move right along. That's how I can put it. But more often than not, it doesn't. I don't think life was meant to be absent of grief and strife and conflict. It's hard. In a way, they actually help us to move back, remind us to move back in, light and darkness together. I wanted to talk about flowing in terms of sitting in the darkened hall as you are now. So I'm bringing us all back to the formal Zazen level of reality, part that we dip into. Flowing implies time, chronological time, past, present, and future. And as we heard from a letter I read about somebody saying being in the present moment. If I can be in the present moment, that's good. That's what my practice is. And in a way, indeed, yes. But of course, we know it's not a fixed point. Because, as it says, in a moment, life is gone. Time passes as swiftly as an arrow from a bow. It's a part of an apple tree. Zen Master Dogen, of course, has a lot to say about time in Uji. The scripture of great wisdom talks about form and emptiness. And I have to stress that what he talks about is emptiness is not like a void, but an emptiness of individual self-nature. So there we have form, our physical bodies, our physical world, and a world, the absolute of individual, of absent of individual self-nature, both physically in ourselves and also in the world generally. Which might be a bit of a stretch. I don't want you to think about that because I'm not going to think about that right now. So returning to here in the darkened hall, there's form, and there's that which is undifferentiated, absent of a self-nature. We are made up of component parts which we conveniently call ourselves. But in a way that, can you say that You exist. Component parts come together to come together as a form. So in a way, when right here, right now, you as a physical identity is that you know and has a name, etc. You exist clearly in your body, in a space, in a room, in a town, in a country, in a world. And on the absolute sense, you don't. You might say you are simultaneously here and gone. And there's no way any of us can catch that truth. And this is, of course, the nub of the scripture of great wisdom and the nub of Sandokai. We exist and don't. And for some people, for me, sometimes I feel, I have a sense of being completely transparent. Odd, I must say. Not something that I'm trying to achieve, but simply seems to be a phenomena of sitting and allowing, please don't pick this up and say, oh goodness, I've never felt or seen myself to be transparent. This is simply one of the multifarious phenomena, you might say, that crop up both in daily life and sitting. So please don't pick that up as the stick to beat yourself with. I call this, why I get a bit ventilated by people talking about being in the present moment, is because the truth of the matter is it's not possible to be in the present moment. We're both here and gone. I call that ongoing flowing, something that you can't grasp, just like putting your hand in a stream. You can't grasp the water. You can't hold it. And while you're sitting in the darkened hall with your body, which incidentally is full of holes, pores we call them, we are permeable. We function within conditions, even as we sit. So, in the absolute sense, we're not isolated beings. We sit in this larger world. Whilst the spotlight is on us in the darkened hall. And if we think of time as not being linear, it is said that as we sit, we're sitting listening to Shakyamuni Buddha giving his first lecture on Vulture Peak. And all the Buddhas and ancestors also are sitting, listening to the Buddha talking on Vulture Peak. So I find it quite difficult to say, I'm sitting alone. But because for me, the world is permeated with the life of the Buddhas and ancestors, which I have to say includes all of you.